Hey guys, today I'll show you an adventure thriller TV series named Candle in the Tomb, Season 3, The Worm Valley. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins after returning from the Dragon Caverns. Hu and his companions began planning their expedition to the frontier province's Worm Valley to search for the dust bead in an ancient emperor's tomb. According to legend, over 2,000 years ago, the emperor moved away from the ancient Dian kingdom and established his reign in the southwestern borderlands. The emperor not only mastered feng shui, but also excelled in one of the kingdom's 3 deadly arts, some kind of poison magic. This journey was bound to be perilous in the extreme. The group was at a restaurant, listening to the blind fortune teller recount his experiences in Worm Valley. Years ago, the fortune teller led a team of grave robbers into the valley. Tragically, the entire team perished, their bodies buried in the depths of the valley. The fortune teller himself only managed to escape by offering a pair of human eyes. The white miasma in the valley alone was terrifying, yet deep within lay an even deadlier red miasma, far more toxic. Hearing this, Goldtooth immediately backed out, saying he still hadn't recovered from losing his spirits during the last expedition in the caverns. He refused to go. The fortune teller sternly warned the trio not to act recklessly and advised them to keep their identities hidden and proceed with utmost caution. In a small flat, Fatso was busy packing his bags. Meanwhile, Hu was deep in thought, worried about the dangers of the trip to Worm Valley. Shirley showed up armed with top-notch gear, outfitted with protection against both physical and magical threats, and boasting resistance to all sorts of elements. Her attire could resist fire, water, and even knife slashes. With their experience from the Dragon Caverns, the 3 were more synchronized than ever and ready for action. The trio disguised themselves as museum researchers, using butterfly catching and specimen making as their cover. They boarded a bus heading to the remote mountain. The rugged mountain roads were battered by torrential rain, and suddenly a landslide occurred ahead. To avoid falling debris, their bus swerved into a roadside ditch and broke down. Left with no other choice, they grabbed their belongings and prepared to continue on foot. The locals seemed terrified by something, trembling in a corner. Hu noticed a life-sized stone figurine amidst the collapsed hillside, with creepy insects crawling out of it. It was both revolting and horrifying. Turning his head, Hu spotted a man in the woods nearby glaring at them with a sinister expression, as if he had been observing them for a while. This added an extra layer of mystery to their expedition. The trio was soon joined by a local girl who guided them to the village. She informed them that a new village chief was being chosen, and the timing of their arrival couldn't have been more coincidental. This was clearly setting the stage for trouble ahead. The guide girl invited them to rest at her home. When she learned they intended to enter Worm Valley, she warned them that it was a cursed place. Although it was rumored to hold treasures, no one who ventured inside had ever returned. Shirley tried to convince the guide girl to recommend a route, but the guide girl explained that the mountains were too high, with snow lines cutting off access, and no one had dared to venture there in years. However, she did mention a water route at the base of the mountain. As they discussed this, the guide girl's brother returned from a hunt. Hu and Shirley quickly noticed his excellent marksmanship, but he was oddly aloof and forbade them from asking about Worm Valley. With no clear answers, the 3 ate a meal and went to rest, preparing to head for the water route the next day. True to form, Fatso fell into a deep slumber within seconds and even managed to snore like a pig while sitting. The next morning, before setting off, Shirley gave the guide girl a bottle of floral water, a luxurious gift at the time. Moved beyond words, the guide girl quickly forgot her brother's warnings and pointed out the direction of the water route. Following the guide girl's directions, the trio ventured into the forest, where they found cow skulls hanging everywhere, a local warning of danger ahead. Proceeding with caution, they were unaware that a mysterious figure was trailing them, reporting their movements to the village chief. It turned out this was just the start of trouble. The village was embroiled in a power struggle for leadership. The village chief used the excuse of stopping outsiders from looting treasures to help his son earn merit. He ordered his men to intercept the trio, turning his son's first trial as a leader into a confrontation with Hu's group. Meanwhile, the guide girl was punished for revealing the water route to the trio. She was locked up and sentenced to exile. Her brother volunteered to join the village chief's son and his men in their pursuit of the trio, vowing to bring them back. Another fierce-looking man joined their ranks, and thus the villainous trio was formed. The group arrived at the outskirts of the mountain, armed and ready, shouting as they charged into the mountain to begin their hunting journey. The village chief was a shrewd and deeply calculating man, and his son had clearly inherited his father's cunning, but their competitor, Ada, was no pushover either. It seemed that Hu, Fatso, and Shirley were in for quite the adventure. Meanwhile, the trio had already reached the waterway at the base of the mountain. Using bamboo, they constructed a raft, shouted a rallying cry, and set off toward Worm Valley. Before long, they entered the waterway cave the guide girl had mentioned. Inside, they were met with eerie and strange sights. The dimly lit cave felt oppressive, and the currents occasionally twisted sharply, making the journey perilous. As the bamboo raft swayed, it bumped into a hidden mechanism underwater. The group paid it little mind, more concerned about the raft capsizing at any moment. After the waters calmed, they looked up to see countless terrifying, suspended, hanged figures dangling in the air above them. Hu immediately recognized them as the same stone figurines they'd encountered during their earlier mishap. Upon closer inspection, however, they realized these weren't made of clay. They were real people. It turns out these horrifying figures were creations of the malevolent emperor human puppet technique. Each one had their hands tied behind their backs, their grotesque, decaying forms covered in a ghastly grayish-brown mold, and they were suspended by iron chains. As if on cue, the cave's mechanisms activated. Suddenly, the connections above the figures snapped, sending them plummeting into the water below. As soon as the bodies hit the water, they began to dissolve and crack open, releasing swarms of aquatic locust bees. These were no ordinary bees, as they could float on the water's surface, and now, propelled by some unseen force, they flew directly toward the group. Chaos erupted as the trio wielded their tools to strike down the oncoming swarm, splattering them with their grotesque juices. Meanwhile, the water below teemed with more locust bees, dragging the bamboo raft downward. In the commotion, Shirley fell into the water and found herself surrounded by a swarm of razor-toothed fish. They are piranhas. She thought her time was up, but fortunately, the piranhas were more interested in devouring the locust bees than her smelly parts. She managed to climb back onto the raft and warned the others about the piranhas, urging them to leave quickly. But before long, the locust bees had been entirely devoured, and now the piranhas turned their attention to the raft, biting through the ropes that held it together. The trio, now like ants on a hot pan, were in imminent danger. As the ropes frayed further, Shirley stabbed a piranha with her blade and threw it aside. The scent of blood caused the rest of the piranhas to frenzy and attack the wounded fish instead. Seizing this moment, Shirley tossed out a grappling hook, catching hold of a rock near the cave entrance, and used it to pull the raft toward the shore. Just as the three jumped onto solid ground, Hu noticed a vital bag of equipment fall into the water. In this desolate wilderness, such equipment was their lifeline. Clenching his teeth, he used a pole to leap onto a nearby rock and retrieved the bag. At that instant, a piranha leapt out of the water and bit him. Fatso and Shirley quickly pulled him back to shore, just as the last of the raft's ropes snapped, causing it to disintegrate. Finally, the group passed through the dangerous mountain and found themselves at the entrance to Worm Valley. The valley seemed like a picturesque landscape painting, but its beauty concealed traps deadlier than those in the mountain. They rested briefly at the cave entrance, where Shirley bandaged Hu's wound. Continuing onward, the trio found their map nearly useless due to the drastic changes in terrain over time. Without clear landmarks, they relied on some distinctive markers and the fortune teller's earlier instructions to navigate north through the forest. The valley was shrouded in mist, and thick vegetation blocked their path, making it difficult for Hu to use his feng shui skills to determine their route. As night approached, they decided to set up camp under an ancient banyan tree. Just as they lit a campfire, Shirley suddenly heard a series of strange signals nearby. 3 long beeps followed by 3 short ones, repeating like Morse code. It was unmistakably the international SOS distress signal. However, when they listened more closely, the signal seemed to vanish. The group decided not to dwell on it. Hu took the first watch while the others rested. In the middle of the night, Shirley was awoken by the strange signal noise once again. She quickly woke up Hu had just fallen asleep not long ago. Shirley was utterly confused. Besides the 3 of them, there was no one else around. So who could be sending the signal? A freshly awakened Hu heard it too. This time, the signal wasn't the SOS Morse code, but the word signaling death. The source of the signal seemed to come from the trees. After assigning Fatso to keep watch, Hu and Shirley climbed up to investigate. At the top of the tree, they discovered the wreckage of a U.S. airplane. Inside the wreckage, they noticed a dark shadow. As they approached, the shadow darted away swiftly. Startled, the two didn't know what it was, except that it seemed to be a predatory bird. Regaining their composure, they continued their search inside the wreckage and found a stash of American weaponry, including a Thompson submachine gun. The legendary weapon finally made its appearance. Just then, Fatso, startled by the earlier commotion, climbed up to join them. Overjoyed at the sight of the firearms, he even recited a poem. The trio immediately looted the supplies, joking about how generous this airdrop was. As Fatso posed with the gun, Hu and Shirley spotted a massive creature looming behind him. Hu squinted and recognized it as a Eurasian eagle owl. The eerie signal noises must have been caused by this owl pecking at the debris. The creature, clearly here to reclaim its territory, let out a piercing, ghost-like screech and flew straight at the group. Fatso unleashed a flurry of bullets from the submachine gun, spraying the owl with gunfire. The commotion was too much for the ancient tree they were standing on, which was already hollow and decayed. It began to collapse under the strain. Not far away, the village chief and his followers had been tracking them and heard the gunshots. It was clear that this would be the site of their battle. As the ancient tree came crashing down, the trio tumbled to the ground. Luckily, none of them were seriously hurt. However, at the base of the tree, they discovered a red-brown crystal sarcophagus. Hu's mind raced with suspicion. Based on the Feng Shui Bible, any burial site surrounded by ancient trees, broken streams, bald hills, or jagged rocks is an ominous place, absolutely unsuitable for human burials. Among these, ancient trees are the most inauspicious. However, considering the top-tier Feng Shui of the Emperor's tomb, this sarcophagus placement made sense. It must be a subsidiary tomb within the main burial constellation. Without hesitation, the group decided to open the sarcophagus. After all, as tomb raiders, bypassing a tomb would be an affront to their trade. When the lid was lifted, they found the sarcophagus filled with dark red liquid that resembled blood but lacked any foul smell. Instead, it had a strong herbal aroma. Shirley speculated that this liquid was likely used for preservation. Suddenly, from beneath the liquid, a corpse wearing a golden ceremonial mask emerged. Remarkably well preserved, the body seemed almost lifelike. Based on the golden mask and the short jade staff found with the corpse, the trio deduced that this was the tomb of the Emperor's high priest, buried in one of the royal mausoleum's subsidiary chambers. While Fatso excitedly claimed the ceremonial staff, he noticed engravings of burial patterns on the sarcophagus lid. The intricate designs depicted a magnificent floating palace. As the trio puzzled over whether the Emperor's tomb was built in the sky, countless red tendrils shot out from the sarcophagus, wrapping around them and pulling them toward it. In the nick of time, Fatso proved his worth by identifying that the red tendrils originated from the body inside the sarcophagus. Acting quickly, Hu grabbed the submachine gun and unloaded a barrage of bullets into the sarcophagus. The dark red liquid drained out completely, causing the GPS tendrils to shrivel and die. Once again, the group narrowly escaped with their lives. Unbeknownst to them, the village chief and his men had caught up and were aiming guns at their backs. The trio pretended to be museum researchers, fabricating a reason for their presence. Meanwhile, they also learned that the guide girl had been captured, hinting at a possible plot twist in the story. Fatso, bluffing, claimed to have a grenade and hurled it toward the tribesmen. The elder immediately ordered his men to open fire, only to realize that Fatso had thrown a can of luncheon meat. A sudden appearance of a giant condor distracted the tribesmen, giving the trio a chance to flee. They eventually arrived at the entrance to Worm Valley, where the massive meteorite with the giant eye rested. Shirley quickly deduced that the meteorite's magnetic field had caused the U.S. plane to crash into the tree, likening the area to a Bermuda Triangle. Just as they caught their breath, a volley of arrows rained down behind them. It was Ada and his group. With no choice but to run, the trio was soon surrounded by dense, toxic white mist emanating from Worm Valley. Hu immediately recalled the fortune teller's warning about the poisonous mists and shouted for the villagers to stop pursuing them. Undeterred, one of the hostile henchmen rushed into the mist, only to lose an eye to the toxic fumes. Taking advantage of the chaos, the trio donned their gas masks and entered the mist, leaving the rest of the villagers blocked outside Worm Valley. Meanwhile, the trio found themselves in a dense forest. The area was known as Worm Valley, infamous for being filled with poisonous insects and plants, making their progress painstakingly slow. Observing traces of insect-repellent red soil on the ground, they deduced they were on the insect barrier path, a defensive line to keep bugs out. This meant they were close to the Emperor's tomb. According to the Emperor's mastery of feng shui, the main tomb would likely be surrounded by 9 auxiliary tombs, positioned to enhance the feng shui energy of the primary burial site. One of these auxiliary tombs should be nearby. Judging by the shape of the valley, they concluded this was the 9th auxiliary tomb. The winding mountain paths leading here suggested that there must be a temple at the end of this layout. Combined with the insect barrier path, it became clear that the temple was designed to protect the site. If they could locate the temple, they'd find the ruins, which would ultimately lead them to the Emperor's tomb. Pressing on, the group made their way through a forest of dancing grass and finally arrived at the dilapidated mountain god temple. The structure was in ruins, overrun by vines. They also discovered that this spot matched the toad symbol on the human skin map. Inside the temple, they found evidence of someone who had arrived before them, now reduced to a skeleton. Fatso noticed a badge on the corpse's clothing. When Shirley saw the badge, she was stunned. As she took the badge in her hands, tears welled up in her eyes. It was the badge she had once given her father with her name, Shirley, engraved on it. This meant the skeleton before them belonged to her father, proving he hadn't died in the ruins of the ancient city as she had believed. Shirley mourned briefly for 3 seconds before calling Hu and Fatso over, saying she had found a clue. Beneath her father's body, she discovered a toad-shaped stone mechanism. Hu pressed it, triggering the mechanism. Suddenly, 9 toad statues slowly rose from the surroundings. Shirley suspected these statues were part of a puzzle. Upon examining them closely, Hu confirmed that the statues were likely the key to opening the path to the ancient Dian kingdom. The 9 toads were arranged in the layout of the 9 palaces and 8 trigrams, with 8 of them capable of being moved. If they could align the 8 toads correctly, the mechanism would activate. Drawing on the techniques, they began to solve the puzzle. Fortunately, Hu's knowledge of the Feng Shui Bible included references to the mysteries. However, he warned that such mechanisms usually had an anti-tampering feature, granting only 3 attempts before permanently locking. As the group worked, Fatso noticed that Ada and his men were closing in on their location. Years ago, when the fortune teller led the robbers into Worm Valley, they were all killed except for the fortune teller, who lost both eyes but managed to escape. Now, in contrast, this group of NPCs seemed to breeze through the valley without facing the deadly water scorpions, sawtooth pikefish, or the toxic white mist. Their only casualty had been one person losing an eye. Comparing their situation, it was almost comical how easily they had reached the valley. Despite having only 3 chances to solve the mechanism, Hu wasn't entirely confident. On their first attempt, they correctly located the life gate, but the mechanism failed to activate. Shirley suggested that the Emperor, being such a malicious individual, might have reversed the Feng Shui, setting the life gate within the death gate. Life becomes death, and death becomes life. Hu tried again, but it still didn't work. Now they were down to their final attempt. Just as Ada and his men arrived at the temple, the trio decided to hide. When Ada's group was about to find them, Hu pretended to be a mountain god, playing tricks on the intruders. Surprisingly, this tactic worked as the group fell for it, retreating in fear. Eventually, the tribe's chief realized they had been fooled and furiously dragged the trio out of their hiding place. Captured, Shirley decided to reveal their true purpose. They were searching for medicine to cure an incurable disease. The chief responded by warning them that the mountain god temple had been forbidden territory for centuries. Sensing an opportunity, Hu told Fatso they had to return to the temple. The chief and his people were oddly cooperative, allowing them to re-enter without much resistance. The trio speculated that these tribesmen were likely descendants of the ancient Dian kingdom. If that were the case, their traditions and customs would have been passed down for generations. Based on the bull skull warnings outside the village, Hu hypothesized that the bull was their sacred totem. This clue led him to suspect that the toad mechanism was related to the bull constellation in the starry sky system. Reciting an old verse, Hu finally solved the puzzle. As Fatso adjusted the mechanism, the puzzle was unlocked, and a hidden stone door began to rise, revealing a secret passage. At the same time, the temple door was being rammed open by the tribe's people. With one toad statue remaining, Hu carefully aligned it, triggering the final step. The passage was fully revealed, and the trio decided to return later for Shirley's father's remains. They entered the secret passage just as the temple door burst open, leaving the villagers behind. The village chief and his men searched the temple thoroughly. Despite the absence of a second exit, they scoured every corner but found no trace of the trio. Sharp-eyed Ada spotted a hidden stone door, but it was incredibly sturdy and impossible to break open. One moment, the temple was sacred and untouchable, and the next, they were preparing to blow it up with explosives. Meanwhile, inside the secret passage, the trio found themselves staring at a massive burial pit. They descended into the passage, moving cautiously through the enormous sacrificial trench, only to reach a dead end. Their only option was to wade through an underground river that snaked alongside the path. Reluctantly, they entered the dark, damp waters. Fatso couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was watching them. Understandable, given his and Hu's past encounter with water ghosts. That incident, from when they were teenagers, was unforgettable. On a blisteringly hot summer day, they had gone to a small, abandoned reservoir with a group of young red guards. Most of them hesitated to jump in, unsure of the water's depth. But Fatso succumbed to peer pressure and dove in first. Seeing this, the others followed, while Hu hesitated. Then, out of nowhere, an old lady appeared beside him, encouraging him to join in, saying the water was shallow and her grandson had been swimming there just that morning. Before Hu could respond, he turned to find her gone. Uneasy, but unable to back out, he eventually joined the others in the water. The outing took a tragic turn when one of the boys didn't resurface. When they retrieved the body, it was tangled in a thick mass of underwater weeds. As they cleared away the vegetation, they discovered a skeletal hand gripping the boy's ankle, a rotting corpse buried in the reservoir. The villagers later speculated that the old lady might have been a ghost, and the skeleton was likely her grandson. The chilling memory left a scar on both Hu and Fatso. Back in the present, the trio trudged through the underground river, passing an expanse of fossilized forest. Eventually, they stumbled upon a semicircular cave opening. Hu noticed that the cave's shape, narrow at the entrance and wide in the belly, with smooth stone walls, resembled the red gourd from the mountain temple. He deduced it must be a gourd cave. As they pondered this, something began to surface from the water nearby. Meanwhile, the villagers at the temple, determined to capture the trio, managed to blast open a hole in the stone door. The village chief seemed hell-bent on ensuring his son would become the next leader, and it was clear he wouldn't rest until Hu, Fatso, and Shirley were caught. Inside the cave, the trio discovered the floating corpse of a woman glowing faintly in the dim light. Inspecting it more closely, they were puzzled. A body that should have decayed after thousands of years was instead perfectly preserved, smooth, pale, and intact. Suddenly, Fatso noticed a sudden movement from within the corpse, as if something was alive inside. Before they could process this, more floating corpses began to appear in the distance, forming a macabre sea of the dead. Realizing something was amiss, the trio decided to retreat without provoking anything. As they moved away, Fatso accidentally slipped on a rock. His submachine gun discharged, shattering the silence. The noise alerted not only the pursuing villagers, but also the floating corpses, which began to stir. To make matters worse, a red, toxic mist, even more lethal than what the fortune teller had warned them about, began to waft towards them. The trio hastily donned their gas masks. But then, from the water, a colossal creature emerged, barreling toward them with the red mist in tow. Hu shouted for them to run, and the three scrambled for cover behind a rocky outcrop. The creature came into view, a massive insect with a hard, armored body impervious to bullets. Its single rotating eye and gaping multi-segmented mouth, equipped with an inner set of jaws, were monstrous. Even the small mouth could easily devour several people at once. The bullets from their guns were useless against the creature's bulletproof exterior. At a critical moment, Fatso noticed the creature's juicy tongue, a possible weak point. However, targeting the juicy tongue was easier said than done. Amid the chaos, Hu's ammo ran out. He called for Fatso to toss him a magazine, but as he caught it and began reloading, the creature lunged at him through the mist. In a desperate gamble, Hu stood his ground, racing to reload his weapon before the creature reached him. Just as it opened its massive jaws to strike, Hu managed to fire a point-blank burst directly into its mouth. The creature roared in pain, retreating slightly. In the ensuing battle, the trio fought with everything they had. Hu climbed onto the creature's back and delivered several slashes, causing it to thrash violently. Wounded, the giant insect released another wave of toxic red mist before retreating into the water. At halftime, during their brief respite, the trio mistakenly believed they had been poisoned by the red toxic mist and began courteously passing the gas masks between them. However, before they realized the mist was harmless, the overpowered villagers had already arrived, ambushing them from behind. Seeing their awkward expressions, the chief's son mockingly asked why they didn't take advantage of the villagers' buff. The village chief declared that Hu, Fatso, and Shirley must return to the village to face punishment. But surrender wasn't an option for the trio. They bolted immediately. Barely taking a few steps, they were interrupted by the reappearance of the giant insect lurking in the water. In a single gulp, it devoured the chief's son. The villagers raised their weapons and unleashed a barrage of gunfire, forcing the creature to spit him out. However, the chief's son had already succumbed. Witnessing this, the insect seemed to empathize with the chief's grief over losing his son, and a heavy silence descended on the cave as everyone mourned the chief's son for a few minutes. But the peace didn't last long, as the giant insect launched another attack. Several villagers met their demise, but Hu and his companions discovered that attacking the creature's juicy tongue was futile. Shirley eventually deduced that the insect was a rotifer-like neural organism with no central nervous system. Its decentralized neural network meant that even if parts of its body were destroyed, it could still survive. To defeat it, they needed to target its weak and smelly spot. The trio hatched a plan to use explosives on the creature's breathing vents, areas sensitive enough to cause it pain. Hu and Fatso distracted the creature while Shirley prepared the detonator. In a flash, she threw the charge, and the blinded creature instinctively swallowed it. With a deafening explosion, the insect was blasted into union pieces. Yet even as fragmented chunks, its remains continued to twitch. Although the creature was finally defeated, the village chief, blinded by grief over his son's death, refused to show gratitude. Instead, he blamed Hu, Fatso, and Shirley for everything and turned his gun on them. The trio scrambled for cover and fled the gourd-shaped cave. As they reached the edge of a cliff and prepared to swing across on vines, the one-eyed henchman cut the vine Hu was holding midair, sending him plunging into the abyss below. Hu hit the water and lost consciousness, but miraculously awoke just in time. As he surfaced, he spotted a cave beneath the water. Meanwhile, Fatso and Shirley, who had escaped to the opposite side of the ravine, were deeply worried about him and quickly began searching for a way to the bottom of the gorge. The village chief, however, left one guard behind to watch the trio's escape route while he and the others returned to the cave to handle his son's funeral arrangements. Regaining consciousness, Hu managed to swim ashore just as Fatso and Shirley arrived. The trio rested briefly by the water's edge and began discussing the giant insect in the gourd cave. Shirley theorized it was an ancient creature from the Triassic period. Like many other large insects, its ancestors likely went extinct due to changes in atmospheric oxygen levels. However, this particular creature may have survived either through evolution or due to the unique atmospheric environment within the gourd cave. Hu was perplexed by the sacrificial golden mask the creature wore. It seems that this could be another instance of the Emperor's witchcraft. As they talked, Shirley noticed that the view from the top of the gorge closely resembled the scene depicted in the tomb map they had seen earlier. It seemed the Emperor had indeed built his tomb in the sky. Determined to reach the Celestial Palace, the trio decided to climb the stone cliff path leading upward. The guards stationed at the cave entrance spotted them and quickly reported back to the village chief, whose hatred for the trio had reached a boiling point. Fueled by a thirst for revenge, he vowed to skin them alive. After a grueling climb, the trio finally reached the entrance to the Celestial Palace. Ascending 99 steep jade steps, they found themselves before a magnificent palace constructed with layers of bricks and tiles, supported by golden beams and purple pillars. They marveled at the palace's grandeur, astonished that a minor border king like the Emperor could create something so opulent. Yet they knew such a place would be rife with deadly traps, so they proceeded with extreme caution. The ancient inscriptions on a stone tablet identified the palace as Lingyun Palace. Standing before its massive doors, the trio tried pushing them open, but they wouldn't budge. It was then that Hu and Shirley noticed dragon and tiger motifs carved into the door, each featuring a keyhole. Realizing the door was locked, Hu remembered the dragon and tiger stone staff they had retrieved from the crystal coffin. It might be the key. Sure enough, when they activated the staff's hidden mechanism, it split into two pieces. Inserting them into the keyholes, they turned the keys, and the massive doors slowly creaked open. The trio stepped into the palace, where they found it filled with ancient bronze artifacts. Fatso's eyes immediately lit up with mischief as he started scheming. They searched the palace thoroughly and eventually discovered clues about the dust bead. An ancient inscription on a stone tablet revealed that the emperor obtained this divine artifact. When the king of its neighboring kingdom learned of it, he sent envoys to the ancient Dian kingdom to demand it. However, the emperor refused, seceded from the Dian kingdom, and established himself as a king on the southwestern border. He built a grand tomb and sought immortality using the dust bead. The trio also discovered a bead resembling the dust bead embedded in the emperor's crown. It seemed the artifact was indeed here, but there were no signs of an underground palace within the temple. As Hu and Shirley marveled at how the Zagrama people had spent generations searching for the dust bead, which might now be within their reach, a piercing, ghostly wail suddenly echoed through the hall. Meanwhile, after learning that the trio had reached the celestial palace, the village chief left 2 guards at the cave and led the others in pursuit. The villagers met their end one by one. True to form, the 2 guards at the cave were devoured by the awakened zombie-like creatures lurking in the death raft. It seemed these creatures were now heading toward Lingyun Palace. Hearing the ghostly screams, the trio began searching the palace for their source. They eventually spotted a red-robed figure with long sleeves on the dome of the hall. Fatso immediately drew his gun to shoot, but Hu stopped him in time. The figure wasn't a ghost, but a red cloth doll suspended from the ceiling. Shirley explained that it was likely part of a sacrificial ritual by the emperor. The red garment worn by the doll appeared to be a Shanpo witch's robe, a ceremonial outfit of the ancient Dian kingdom. Curious to find the source of the ghostly sounds, they decided to burn the robe. Fatso volunteered to climb up and do it himself. Excited by the prospect of treasure, Fatso completely forgot his fear of heights, recalling how the priest's crystal coffin yielded 2 precious artifacts. He figured this would also yield something valuable. After burning the robe and climbing back down, the trio noticed that the villagers had arrived outside the hall. The 3 quickly devised an escape plan. The transformed, vengeful village chief stormed into the palace with his men. Hu and the others threw a smoke bomb, blanketing the hall in thick smoke. Taking advantage of the chaos, the trio launched surprise attacks. However, Fatso, ever the troublemaker, was caught by the one-eyed henchman who used him as a hostage to lure out Hu and Shirley. Left with no choice, the 2 surrendered. The village chief ordered the trio to be tied up and prepared to hang them to death. Despite their repeated explanations and Ada's pleas for the chief to spare them, the chief, blinded by rage and grief, refused to show mercy. He ordered the execution to proceed immediately. Just as the trio was on the brink of suffocation, salvation came from an unexpected source, the zombie-like creatures from the gourd cave. The villagers had no choice but to defend themselves against the invading creatures, leaving the unconscious Hu, Fatso, and Shirley unattended. Ada took the opportunity to cut their ropes and wake them up. The trio joined the fight, but the swarm of the zombie-like creatures seemed endless. Wave after wave kept coming. The villagers fell one after another. Witnessing the carnage, the village chief was struck with regret. Clarity returned to him as he realized that his selfish ambitions had led them all to this nightmare. Hoping to secure his son's place as the next chief, he had dragged everyone into this hell. Although he had managed to survive 10 episodes of peril, he now accepted his fate. The chief noticed that the zombie-like creatures were blind and located their targets using sound. In a moment of self-sacrifice, he began striking a nearby stone beam with his knife, drawing the creatures toward him. Holding a detonator in his arms, he intended to take the creatures with him. As the swarm closed in, he detonated the explosives, destroying himself and the creatures. The chief's heroic sacrifice saved everyone. The zombie-like creatures in Lingyun Palace were completely annihilated. Only then did Hu and Shirley have a moment to examine the strange creatures. Looking at the remnants of their bodies, they realized they resembled the parasitic bugs from the death raft. Their humanoid forms and ferocity reminded them of the Emperor's witchcraft. Shirley speculated that some magnetic field anomaly in the gourd cave might have caused their mutation. Regardless, the immediate threat was far from over. They had only dealt with a small fraction of the zombie-like creatures. The gourd cave still contained many more of the death rafts. Even if they avoided them on the way back, staying in Lingyun Palace was equally dangerous. Since the creatures had made it to the palace, there must be a hidden passage between the gourd cave and Lingyun Palace. More zombie-like creatures could arrive at any moment. Moreover, there were still no clues about the underground palace here. That's when Hu suddenly remembered the underwater cave he had seen earlier in the pool. He figured that must be the entrance to the underground palace. The trio now faced another pressing issue, not knowing what to do with the villagers. If they sent them back on their own, they would almost certainly encounter the zombie-like creatures from the gourd cave. The one-eyed henchman pleaded with Hu, saying they were just as afraid of the danger and hoped to stay with the trio until their task was complete and they could all leave the valley together. At this point, Fatso began acting strangely, mumbling to himself and even stepping one foot off the edge of a cliff. Thankfully, Shirley stopped him in time. Sensing something was wrong, she immediately informed Hu. Hu suspected it might have something to do with the Shanpo witch's robe. Though he had his doubts, Fatso was in no condition to provide any answers. To test whether Fatso might be possessed, Hu scattered a handful of sticky rice over him, an old method to identify spirits. The group made their way back to the valley floor, where ominous black clouds loomed overhead and gusts of wind whipped through the air. Hu explained that this was the phenomenon of the black pig crossing the celestial river, a sign of ancient corpses causing trouble. It appeared they were on the right track. Hu distributed equipment to Ada and the others, instructing them to stay on the shore and watch out for the one-eyed henchman, clearly foreshadowing that the one-eyed henchman was up to something. Donning their gear, the trio dived into the water and swam into an underground cave. Inside, the scenery was otherworldly. However, Fatso's condition worsened. He refused to surface, and when Hu approached him, Fatso suddenly went berserk, brandishing a knife and attacking Hu. After a struggle, Hu managed to subdue him, during which a strange, black, jade-like object fell from Fatso's body. Realization struck Hu. It must have been Fatso's sticky fingers that got him into trouble again. He had likely taken this object from the Shanpo witch's doll and become cursed as a result. Just as Hu was piecing this together, Fatso broke free from his grip and bolted deeper into the tomb passage. Hu instructed Shirley to examine the black jade while he chased after Fatso. When Hu finally caught up, Fatso, still under the curse, attacked him like a rabid animal, even opening his mouth as if he intended to bite. With no other option, Hu knocked him out with a solid blow. Afterward, the group examined the ancient jade. Shirley identified it as the Shanpo's tongue, an artifact used in a type of dark sorcery that targeted people's tongues. She retrieved the divine pearl, whose fragrance could stimulate the brain and restore clarity. True to its power, Fatso woke up immediately after smelling it. Fatso then admitted what had happened. He had taken the black jade from the mouth of the Shanpo witch's doll. What's worse, his curiosity had gotten the better of him. He had licked it using his own tongue. The others were speechless at his sheer audacity. No wonder he got cursed. While joking about Fatso's earlier attack, Hu noticed something unusual about the ancient corpse nearby. Shirley deduced that the corpse was likely used to store corpse oil. Without hesitation, Fatso lit it on fire, engulfing the cave in flames. As the cave illuminated, their visibility greatly improved. Fatso's sharp eyes soon spotted a door in the ground. The trio decided to investigate and soon encountered another door, this one labeled Heaven's Gate. Hu speculated that this must be a passage created by the emperor for his ascension ritual. Beyond the gate surely lay the underground palace. As they prepared to enter, Shirley hesitated. The dust bead might be inside, and she suddenly felt unsure of how she would face it. Pushing open the door, the trio found themselves standing before a bridge. Hu explained that this must be the Bridge of Three Lives, symbolizing past, present, and future lives. Crossing it was believed to transcend mortal existence and achieve immortality. Clearly, the emperor had become obsessed with the idea of ascension. On the other side of the bridge, 3 human-shaped coffins came into view. The most striking was the central coffin, a massive bronze casket suspended in mid-air. It was the largest and heaviest of the 3. Bronze coffins were typically used by nobles to prevent corpse transformations. Secured with 9 heavy locks, the trio suspected this was likely the emperor's coffin. Next to it was a wooden coffin, unvarnished and blackened like charcoal. Fatso exclaimed in shock, recognizing it as one of the infamous cursed coffins described in the fortune teller's tomb raiding guide. A chill ran through the group's smelly butts at the ominous implication. However, Fatso's greed quickly overtook his fear when he heard that the yin coffin was worth a fortune. Finally, the 3rd coffin caught their attention. This one was made of rare, icy-cold limestone and was noticeably shorter than the other 2. Hu speculated that it might not contain a complete corpse. Whatever the case, these were all just guesses. The only way to confirm their contents was to open them. The trio wasted no time and began searching the southeast corner, preparing to light candles and start their tomb raiding ritual. At this moment, Shirley asked if these 3 coffins, combined with the earlier Bridge of 3 Lives, represent the Emperor's 3 reincarnations. This insight sparked a realization in Hu. He speculated that Shirley might be right. The 3 coffins likely contained decoys, and the real Emperor was hidden elsewhere in the tomb. Suddenly, a strange noise echoed through the underground palace. Fearing that Fatso might have touched something he shouldn't again, Hu grew uneasy. Shirley then noticed 6 ghostly flames flickering in the palace. As they moved closer, they discovered these weren't ordinary flames, but eternal lamps crafted from the black-scaled merpeople. The black-scaled merpeople, resembling mermaids, were creatures whose body fat had an exceptionally low ignition point and could burn for a long time. For this reason, they were often turned into eternal lamps or sacrificial tools in tombs. Before they could react further, another eerie sound reverberated through the palace. This time, the source was clear. The noise came from the bronze coffin, which now emitted rhythmic, unsettling creaks, as though something inside was trying to break free. Simultaneously, the 3 candles in the southeast corner were extinguished, leaving the trio drenched in cold sweat. Under Hu's persistent questioning, Fatso finally admitted that he'd swiped the bronze coffin's protective mirror, an ancient talisman meant to suppress the dead. Hu hurriedly ordered Fatso to relight the candles while he restored the mirror to its original place. But just as the candles were lit, they went out again, and 3 guiding child lamps suddenly appeared in the palace. These lamps, intended to lead the Emperor's soul to immortality, were horrifyingly crafted from living people. Fatso and Shirley couldn't help but curse the Emperor's ruthlessness, calling him unimaginably cruel. Meanwhile, Hu's attention shifted to the total number of eternal lamps. They now numbered 9. Each lamp represented a corpse, but with only 3 coffins present, where were the other 6 bodies? To make matters worse, Shirley noticed that the guiding child lamps bore strange red markings. It seems that the Emperor had foreseen their arrival and intended for them to die here as part of his scheme. The trio, filled with confusion, became even more unsettled when Shirley spotted a large ox head lamp among the eternal flames. This lamp undoubtedly symbolized the Emperor, but its presence threw off the count entirely. Something didn't add up. Suddenly, the eerie noise rang out again. The trio turned to see the chains suspending the bronze coffin begin to snap, likely weakened by time and the coffin's incessant movement. The coffin crashed to the ground, bringing down a stone slab from above and smashing through the floor, revealing a pit below. Without hesitation, the trio descended to the lower tomb chamber to investigate. Inside, they discovered an array of burial artifacts, as well as a coffin made of what appeared to be deep-sea ice, an ominous stone ghost coffin. Such coffins were known to be cursed, so it couldn't possibly be the Emperor's final resting place. He would never bury himself in such a coffin. To be sure, they decided to open it. Fatso pried the coffin open, revealing a grotesque corpse pieced together from 3 parts: a head, a torso, and legs. The trio immediately understood the purpose of the 3 upper coffins. This was the fused skeletal remains of the Emperor's 3 reincarnations. To achieve immortality, the Emperor had selected 3 corpses, each subjected to horrific rituals. One had its eyes gouged out, another its heart removed, and the third its soul extracted. These corpses represented the trials of the 3 lives and 3 hells, and were fused into one body, buried in the tomb's lowest level to symbolize the underworld. The 3 coffins in the upper tomb symbolized the mortal world, and Hu deduced there must be yet another level above them representing the heavens. The Emperor's true body was likely hidden in this uppermost layer, so the trio decided to ascend and search. When they reached the top level, the trio expected to find the Emperor's coffin aligned with the others in a straight line, following traditional Feng Shui principles. However, there was no sign of his coffin. It seemed the Emperor had deliberately altered the layout, relocating his resting place to another location. The trio began searching again. Meanwhile, the one-eyed henchman was causing trouble. He incited the villagers, accusing Hu's group of being thieves who had dived into the water to search for treasure. The one-eyed henchman attempted to lead the villagers into the water, but Ada stopped them. The disagreement escalated into a physical fight, with both sides determined to assert dominance. Ada initially had the upper hand, but the one-eyed henchman used the guide girl as a distraction and landed a decisive blow. He tied up Ada and the others and led the villagers into the water in pursuit of Hu's group. Back at the top level, the trio noticed that the chamber was filled with statues of angry-faced guardians, their eyes made of rare and valuable gemstones. Fatso's eyes lit up with greed, wishing he could pry them all loose. Meanwhile, Hu's attention was drawn to a stone mural depicting a woman. As he studied it closely, the mural seemed to come alive, and a ghostly hand reached out, gripping Hu's throat. He felt powerless and suffocated. Noticing Hu's strange behavior, Fatso rushed over and found him standing rigid as if asleep. Fatso slapped him hard on the back, jolting him awake. Thinking Hu had merely dozed off from exhaustion, Fatso shrugged it off. But Hu, now alarmed, told Shirley about the mural. When the two examined it together, the ghostly hand emerged again, this time grabbing both their throats. This time, Fatso noticed the strange behavior of Hu and Shirley standing rigidly in place. Suspicious, he glanced at the mural and immediately sensed something off. Without wasting time, he turned his face away and quickly used a tool to destroy the mural, finally freeing Hu and Shirley from its grasp. The three realized that the mural had a powerful hypnotic and hallucinatory effect. Thankfully, it was now destroyed. However, as they examined the damaged wall, they discovered a woman's corpse hidden behind it. Before they could figure out why the corpse was there, it crumbled into ashes and a swarm of corpse moths emerged. Behind where the body had been, a hidden passageway came into view. The moths circled briefly and then charged straight at the trio. Knowing the moths were toxic, the three quickly dived into the passageway, finding another burial chamber. They grabbed a coffin lid and used it to block the entrance just in time. Catching their breath, they began inspecting the chamber. It was filled with murals depicting the emperor's deeds, slaying mountain demons, subduing foreign tribes, and taming monstrous beasts. One mural in particular caught Hu's attention, the emperor gazing at a lakeside view. The scene looked eerily familiar to Hu, as if he had seen it before. This mural seemed to plant the seeds for their next adventure in the Kunlun tomb. Based on the murals and other clues, they confirmed they had found the true burial chamber of the emperor. But where was his body? As they puzzled over this, the chamber suddenly seemed to come alive. The walls began to melt, and the floor started shifting. It finally dawned on Hu what the 10 eternal lamps symbolized. The 6 black-scaled mermaid lamps represented the emperor, his queen, and the 3 generations of reincarnated corpses in the lower-level shadow coffin. The 3 guiding child lamps symbolized the children used as sacrifices to craft the lamps. The largest bull-headed lamp corresponded to the massive resurrected flesh lichen they now found themselves inside. This monstrous flesh lichen had become a corpse cave, and the trio was standing within its body. To their horror, the flesh lichen began to reawaken, having absorbed the fresh air brought in by the intruders. Even more terrifyingly, the countless burial craftsmen sacrificed as fertilizer for the lichen started to stir, clawing their way to life as grotesque monsters. The lichen, once hollowed out to make elixirs for the emperor's immortality, had been repopulated with countless human victims. Now, it sought to devour the intruders and make them part of its grotesque creation. With no time to waste, the 3 decided to act. Fatso and Shirley hoisted Hu into the depths of the flesh lichen to search for the king's body and retrieve the dust bead. Hu frantically searched the emperor's body and found 2 objects, but neither was the bead. As the lichen began to engulf them, Hu turned his attention to the emperor's head. Time was running out. Meanwhile, the henchman and his gang had reached the underground palace and found the 3 coffins. One villager spotted the copper coffin ceiling mirror and, mistaking it for treasure, pried it off. When they tried to open one of the coffins, a hidden mechanism shot out an arrow, killing one of the villagers instantly. After all the buildup, this minor trap felt like a bit of an anticlimax. Back inside the lichen, the group's efforts to sever the emperor's head proved futile. Fatso told them there's no time and pulled Hu and Shirley to safety. They had no choice but to abandon the search and flee the monstrous lichen. Once outside, Hu decided they couldn't let the lichen grow unchecked and pose a threat to humanity. He rigged explosives and blew the entire corpse cave to pieces. With the lichen destroyed, Hu showed Fatso and Shirley the walnut-like object he had managed to retrieve from the emperor's hand. It was the dust bead. The 3 exchanged a knowing smile, filled with relief and exhaustion. After all their trials, they had finally found it. As they prepared to leave the underground palace, the henchman and his remaining crew ambushed them. Before they could react, knives were at their throats. The henchman had always suspected Hu of seeking treasure, and his suspicions seemed confirmed when he found a golden mask in Hu's bag. Just then, a strange rumble echoed from above. Hu realized it was the underground palace's final death throes. It was about to collapse. Moments later, the walls began to crack, and jets of water burst through, flooding the chamber. Panic ensued as everyone scrambled for the exit. The henchman tripped and was swept away by the flood, disappearing into the depths of the burial chamber to spend eternity with the Emperor. In a matter of moments, the henchman met his anticlimactic end, taking his storyline with him. The remaining two villagers and Hao's group swam back to the surface, rescuing Ada and the others. The group was ready to return, making their way back to the gourd cave. The atmosphere was as tense as ever, with a lingering sense of eeriness in the air and the ground crawling with terrifying creatures. After a brief discussion, the plan to escape was set into motion. The creatures, blind and unaware, were taking a moment of rest, and this was the perfect time to quietly sneak past them. Hu led the way, cautiously scouting the route. He moved with stealth, encountering some tense moments along the way. Once he found the path, he signaled for the others to follow. The gourd cave was eerily quiet, almost like a deathly silence. Passing through safely seemed impossible now, maybe even for the rest of their lives. Fortunately, this time the trouble wasn't caused by the blundering fatso, but by a greedy villager who made noise while trying to retrieve the town's copper mirror from the tomb, which alerted the creatures. The chaos had begun, and the cave was soon filled with the sounds of gunshots, cries, and roars. After a fierce struggle with the creatures and losing a few members, they finally managed to escape the gourd cave. Fatso quickly tossed a grenade, collapsing the tunnel outside the cave and giving them a way out. But Shirley had been scratched by a creature, and the poison had taken effect. She fainted, collapsing into Hu's arms. The scene shifted, and the group arrived at the guide girl's home. The girl had been granted amnesty and released by the villagers. Meanwhile, Shirley had been treated by the village doctor, and although the virus was under control, she had been unconscious for 3 days and nights. Hu had stayed by her side without rest during that time, and finally, Shirley woke up. Once the three of them had rested, they prepared to return to the capital city with the guide girl and Ada seeing them off. Ada, now the new village chief, was confident that under his leadership, the village would only improve. After some brief farewells, they boarded the train back to the capital city. This journey had led them to find the dust bead, but the red spots on the backs of their necks and the bloodshot eyes hadn't disappeared. It seemed that the dust bead required a guide to unleash its full potential. At this moment, Hu pulled out another item he had taken from the Emperor, believing it to be related to the dust bead. It was a set of 16 jade rings, which might be connected to the feng shui technique. The three of them decided that after returning to the capital city, Shirley would take the dust bead to a research institute, while Hu would investigate the connection between the dust bead, the jade rings, and the feng shui technique. After some investigation, Shirley had no breakthroughs, and Hu's attempts also proved fruitless. There was no mention of the dust bead in the fragment of the Feng Shui Bible that he had. But then, Hu remembered that the technique was based on another ancient book, and the one person who was well-versed in the ancient book was their old acquaintance, the blind fortune teller. The three of them went to visit the fortune teller, who was both surprised and impressed to see them return unharmed from the Worm Valley. Hu didn't waste time and directly asked about the ancient book. Upon learning the reason, the fortune teller told them that there was a Taoist priest who claimed to know all the book hexagrams living in a remote mountain. So Hu and the others set off for the mountain. However, when they met the Taoist priest, he seemed more like a swindler than a master. Instead, they encountered a man who was passing by and spoke knowledgeably about feng shui, frequently mentioning the ancient book. It turned out that this man was a descendant of the author of the Feng Shui Bible. This young man was, in fact, a fellow disciple of Hu and his companions. This fortuitous meeting was clearly fate's arrangement. After Hu explained everything, the man read their fortunes and told them that heading west would bring them fortune. However, he mentioned that he had other matters to attend to and could not assist them on their journey to the Kunlun tomb. His suggestion to go west reminded Hu of a mural of a lake view he had seen in the Emperor's tomb. It was the same ancient tomb he had encountered in Tibet during his younger days. It seemed that the westward path indeed referred to Tibet, and now Hu was resolute. He would go to the Kunlun tomb. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.